network.
Yes. Khalid, please mute. Wait. I want you to think about the most expensive thing in research. It is not equipment. It is not field work. It is not journal subscription fees. The most expensive thing in research is a question that was never precise enough to answer. Because everything built on it, every interview conducted, every data set generated and analyzed, every chapter written inherits this imprecision. A vague question does not produce a vague thesis. It produced a collapsed thesis. And that is why today we'll be looking at crafting powerful research questions and identifying gaps. That's what we'll be doing in the first session of today's webinar. Last week, we built the architecture of academic excellence. We named the 4 pillars. We say pillar 1 is clarity of research questions. And we said that was everything. Today, we go inside pillar 1. We learn how to build it properly from the ground. Khalid, please mute yourself. Today's not a theoretical session. By the time you leave this room or this webinar today, you will have a sharper question than the one you arrived with before. This is the standard I'm holding us to today. So today, we'll be looking at what I call the architecture of excellence. In part A of this talk, we'll be looking at the architecture of a strong research question. We will dismantle the difference between a topic and a question. Master the 5 characteristics of a strong question. Understand the 5 types of research questions and what they demand. In the second part, we'll identify research gaps. We will learn what a real gap looks like, where to find defensible gaps, how to articulate a gap statement with a scholarly precision. And we'll also look at how to avoid the common gap fallacies that reviewers see immediately they see our work. And in the third session, or in the third part of this particular session, we'll be looking at hypothesis developments. For those in quantitative, experimental, and causal design, we'll build hypotheses that are clear, directional, measurable, and theoretically grounded. For those in qualitative tradition, we will understand why hypotheses are inappropriate and what takes their place. So like I said earlier, the most expensive thing in research is the question that was never precise enough to answer. A great research question is not the beginning of your research. It is the culmination of your thinking. So let's dive into what we'll be discussing today. There's a core distinction between a research topic and a research question. A topic is a subject domain. A research question is a specific bounded inquiry within that domain that produces a defensible answer. These are not the same thing. They are different things. A research interest, on the other hand, is the motivation that draws you to a topic. But it is not a question. Curiosity must undergo transformation, a process of disciplinary structuring before it becomes researchable. Let's look at this, for instance. If we say social media and mental health, social media and mental health, that is a research topic. If you say, I want to understand why young people seem more anxious now that social media exists. I want to understand why young people seem more anxious now that social media exists. That is a research interest. But a research question will be like, what is the relationship between daily Instagram use and self-reported anxiety levels among female undergraduates aged 18 to 25 in Nigerian universities? That is a research question. And you can see the walkthrough from our topic to question and how it has changed. Social media narrows to Instagram. So there's narrowing of scope. A specific platform with specific affordances. So you narrow the scope from topic to question. Young people is narrowed to female undergraduate age 18 to 25. This is a specific population. When you are dealing with research question, you are dealing with specifics. So initially it was broad. Now we are going narrower. In the research question, we mentioned Nigerian universities. This gives a specific context that signals a genuine contextual gap. Then we talked about relationship in the question. This signals a comparative or correlational design. We also mentioned self-reported anxiety levels. This gives us the dependent variable, which is measurable. So we have narrowed down our scope, we have specified the context, and we have identified variables to be measured. Now this is how to form a research topic to a research question. Now, there's something we must note. If your research question could fit on a billboard in any city in the world and still make sense, it is not a topic. It is a research question. And this is what I mean. If you are passing any city of the world and you see a billboard, you are driving past a billboard, you have nothing more than 3 seconds to read the information on that billboard. So if somebody can read the information within 3 seconds and understand it, that is a research topic. It's not a research question. A research topic is broad, it's understandable to all, but a research question has context, and it's not something you can understand just within 3 seconds of viewing it. Now, let's also look at some differences. Let's compare research topic, or research interest to research question based on what we have discussed so far. A research topic or interest is a broad subject area or personal curiosity, whereas a research question is precise, it is specific, it is bounded, and it is a researchable inquiry. An example we may give is a research topic may be education and poverty in Nigeria. This is very, very broad and vague. Seeing that topic, you understand it, but what exactly do you want to research there? It is not something that easily can be picked up. But if you look at the research question that can be drawn from it, you say, how does primary school fee policy affect girl child enrollment in rural Benue State between 2015 and 2023? You can see that this is researchable. This is researchable, and it's different from what we saw before. Then the scope for research topic is quite unlimited, and it's impossible to answer. Whereas the scope for a research question is bounded and is answerable within a defined study. In the research topic, you cannot know which method to use from there. But when you ask a precise research question, the method is implied even from a research question. A research topic does not identify a gap, but a good research question must identify a contextual and temporal gap. And this is very, very important. So what are the 5 characteristics of a strong research question? Number 1, it is clear and focused. The question must be expressible in single specific sentence that a non-specialist in your field can read without ambiguity. If you need a paragraph to explain what your question is actually asking, the question itself needs more work. So the research question must be clear and focused. Another thing is it has to be simple. Simplicity is very, very important. A complex question can clearly be stated and it will confuse people. But if you make it clear, somebody that is not in your field should be able to read your research question and be able to understand it. So what I'm trying to say in essence is that clarity does not equal simplicity. It doesn't have to be very simple. It can be complex, yet can be clear. The second thing is that it must be researchable. A research question is one for which evidence can be gathered through legitimate scholarly methods within the constraints of your project. A question that requires data that you cannot access, participants who will not engage, or resources you do not have is not researchable in your context. Imagine writing a research question that will involve you interviewing the head of a terrorist organization in the world. You have to think of how that terrorist the head is accessible to you. No matter how beautiful the research question is, that person is not accessible to you. And it's not a good, that means it's not researchable. A question that requires data you cannot access is not researchable, regardless of how interesting it is. Philosophical questions are often important, but not directly researchable as empirical questions. For instance, should university be free? If we ask, should university be free, if that is your research question, how are you going to research that? Is that researchable? What arguments do vice chancellors in sub-Saharan Africa make for and against tuition fee abolition? This one is researchable. But if you just ask, should university be free? It's not a researchable question. This is a policy or ethical question. It's not researchable. But if you say, what arguments do vice chancellors in sub-Saharan Africa make for and against tuition fee abolition? It makes it researchable. It can be answered through interviews and documentary analysis. So that's the second characteristics of a research question. The third characteristic is that it must be significant. Significance has two dimensions. Disciplinary significance. Does answering this research question advance scholarly understanding in a meaningful way? That is one. Then we have applied significance. Does answering this question have a practical implication for policy, practice, or social outcomes? A good research question has to be significant. A question can be significant in one dimension without the other. I talked about disciplinary and applied significance. It can be significant in only one of them and to still be a good research question. We are going to discuss the so what test later, and we'll be able to understand the issue of significance better. The fourth characteristic is feasible. Feasibility encompasses time, access, resources, and ethical clearance. A question that would take 15 years of longitudinal data to answer is not feasible for a doctoral study. So feasibility is a very important characteristic for a research question. You can't be doing a PhD of 3 years and you want to ask a research question that you need 15 years to answer. That is not feasible. A question that requires access to classified government documents is not feasible if that access is unavailable. If your research question is such that will require the National Security Advisor to provide you with all the security details of a country, you can be sure that that is not a feasible research question. And lastly, your research question must be theoretically anchored. A strong research question is not born in vacuum. It is grounded in theoretical tradition. People in social sciences and management sciences do this a lot. But people in natural sciences, medical sciences, physical sciences, they do not add theoretical questions to their research questions, but it is implied. And we'll see this as we continue. So one tip you should know, list every data source required. Do you have access, time, and ethical clearance for all? If not, revise before your design collapses. This has to do with feasibility. Now we look at the questions that determines method. What type matters? The question determines everything. If you do not have a good research question, then your method may fail. The type of research question you ask is not just your stylistic preference. It determines your method design and your data collection approach, your analytical strategy, and the form your findings will take. Getting the type right is important as getting the content right. Many postgraduate students write research questions that are structurally one type, but then use methods suited to a different type. This is fundamentally wrong. This is a fundamental design mismatch, and it is one of the most common sources of major corrections in thesis examination. So when your research question is pointing towards one direction, then you choose a method that points the other direction. A good examiner will see this and know there is a fundamental problem there. And with that fundamental problem, there could be a lot of things you need to answer for. So we have several types of research questions and the type of methods that it allows. We have the exploratory type of research question. This one investigates poorly understood phenomena and generates new insights. An example is, what factors shape early career researchers' decision to leave academia? What factors shape early career researchers' decision to leave academia? This is an exploratory question. And what is the typical method you can use for such question? It has to be interviews, focus groups, and grounded theory. Then we have the descriptive research question. These documents characteristics, distributions, or patterns as they exist. An example of such a research question is, what is the publication output profile of Nigerian universities between 2010 and 2023? What is the publication output profile of Nigerian universities between 2010 and 2023? To answer this kind of question, you need to use surveys, documentary analysis, and bibliometric analysis. So a research question determines the kind of method you are going to use. We also have the comparative research question that examines differences or similarities across groups, context, or time. An example of such is, how do thesis completion rates differ between funded and unfunded doctoral students? How do thesis completion rates differ between funded and unfunded doctoral students? In this case, you have to use the mixed method, use case study, and you do statistical comparisons. Then there's the causal research question, which establishes cause and effect relationship between variables. An example is, Does research mentorship significantly predict publication output among postgraduate students? Does research mentorship significantly predict publication output among postgraduate students? For you to be able to answer this question, the method you use will be experiment, regression analysis, structural equation modeling, and the likes. And finally, when we talk about evaluative research question, it assesses the effectiveness, what or impact of a program or intervention. An example is, how effective is the academic mentorship model in improving thesis quality among early career researchers? If we want to look at what we are doing, for instance, and evaluate it, then the question will be, how effective is this mentorship model in improving thesis quality among early career researchers? So for us to be able to answer this question, we use things like program evaluation, where we do pre and post comparison interviews. If you had, some of you did an interview in the questionnaire you filled at the beginning of the program. If at the end of the program, you fill another questionnaire and we can compare both, that is an evaluative study. One of the methods we mentioned is exploratory. And do not confuse exploratory with weak. An exploratory research question is not a question you may ask because you have not thought deeply enough to ask a specific one. It is a question you ask because the phenomenon is genuinely poorly understood, and the scholarly literature has not yet developed adequate concepts to frame it. The distinction matters. And this is especially so for our postgraduate students, because it can be a source of question during your oral interview. The type of your question should appear in your methodology when you are writing your thesis. Now let's look at the so what test. The most important question you will ask about your question is the so what test. And it's not a rhetorical device. It is a rigorous significance assessment. It asks if this research question is fully answered, if a complete, credible, methodologically sound answer exists, what changes, who benefits, what does the field now know that it could not know before? What policy, practice, or theoretical understanding is advanced as a result of your research question? Now let's use an example. If my research question is, what are the challenges facing Nigerian postgraduate students? What are the challenges facing Nigerian postgraduate students? So what we'll begin with, we will know that challenges exist. This is not a contribution. The existence of challenge is already known. So it doesn't make it a contribution. So the revised question could now be like, how do structural funding gaps in Nigerian federal universities shape postgraduate students' thesis completion timelines? And what coping mechanisms do students develop in response? So if we use the so what test to this study will provide the first systematic evidence of the relationship between institutional funding and thesis completion during contest. with direct implication for university policy on research students' support, and theoretical implication for how we conceptualize academic resilience in resource-limited environments like Africa. This will be a contribution. So the so what test is very, very important when we are considering our studies and writing our research question. So now we move to identifying research gaps. A research gap is not simply an area that has not been studied. Every conceivable topic has areas that have not been studied. An absence of study is not itself a gap. It may simply be an area that the discipline has correctly judged as not worth studying. So the fact that it has not been studied does not necessarily make it a gap. A genuine research gap is an absence, limitation, or tension in the existing literature that, if addressed, will meaningfully advance scholarly understanding. The gap must be defensible, meaning you can demonstrate through engagement with the literature that it exists, that it matters, and that your study is positioned to address it. So in essence, a gap is not a hole in a map. It is a question the field has not yet answered and can be demonstrated to need answer. Let's look at the 5 types of genuine research gaps. 5 types of genuine research gaps. 1, it is under-theorized. This means a phenomenon exists but lacks adequate theoretical explanation. An example of such a gap statement is, recognition theory has been applied to Western contexts, but not to post-colonial African social structures. No, the phenomenon exists, but lacks adequate theoretical explanation. So this is under theorization. That is a defensible research gap. We also have the methodological research gap, meaning prior studies used methods unable to fully capture this phenomenon. For instance, existing studies rely exclusively on self-report surveys. No qualitative work has explored lived experience of the phenomenon. This gives a methodological gap. This is strong, and it justifies the design choice. Another is contextual, meaning the phenomenon has not been studied in this specific context, population, or setting. For instance, research on this policy has been conducted exclusively in Anglophone countries. Francophone African contexts remain understudied. Or an example is work that was done in the desert area, and you want to repeat such work in the swamp area. The context is different. the setting is different. That gives a contextual gap. Then there's the issue of contradictory findings. This means that existing literatures produce conflicting results that have not been resolved. Author A says this about this subject, and author B, C, and D say a contrary thing about the subject. Can your research resolve this gap between what author A and author B, C, and D are saying? For instance, studies by X in 2018 and Y in 2021 produced contradictory findings on Z. This tension remains theoretically unresolved. And you position your study as a resolution attempt. This is a gap. Lastly, we talk about the emerging phenomenon. New events, technologies, or policies have outpaced existing scholarship. For instance, AI integration in doctoral supervision is a post-2022 development, not yet addressed in the supervisory literature. If you are talking about AI, if you look at literature before 2022 or 2023, does not clearly address this. So if you are doing something that addresses this, we are now talking about emerging phenomenon. A strong gap statement cites specific literature to demonstrate the absence or limitation. It does not merely assert that a gap exists. It proves it by reference to what has been done and precisely what has not been done. That is how to develop a good research gap. A weak gap statement asserts an absence without evidence. If you assert without evidence, you are giving a very poor or weak research gap. No one has studied this. It's not a gap. How do you know no one actually has studied this? It is a claim that requires substantiation. How can you substantiate that nobody has ever studied what you are doing? How do you know? Have you conducted a systematic literature review across every literature in the world to know that no one has studied this? So you cannot say no one has studied this as a gap statement. Let's give an example. A weak gap would be no one has studied academic burnout among postgraduate students in Abuja. This is a weak gap because you do not know for sure. You have not gone to every library to read every publication to know. A strong gap will look like, while academic burnout among postgraduate students is well documented in European and North American contexts, Smith 2019, Jones 2021, the unique structural and socio-economic pressures facing students in Nigerian federal universities, including funding insecurity, inadequate supervisory capacity, and limited institutional mental health support, constitutes contextually distinct phenomenon that existing models have not theorized. This study addresses that theoretical and contextual gap. This makes your work specific. The strong version does four things. One, it acknowledges that the study has been done before, it exists, using the European and North American studies. It specifies what is structurally different about what the new context is. It argues that the difference is theoretically significant, not merely geographical. And it signals that the existing theoretical models are inadequate for the new context. And that is how to write a strong gap statement. Now let's look at what we call gap fallacies. What reviewers reject immediately they see it. And we tend to use it a lot. One is the geographical orphan. No study has been done on this in this city, country, region. That is a geographical orphan. Without a theoretical argument for why context matters to the phenomenon, geography alone is not a gap. Ask yourself, if I found a study done in my exact city, will my study still be necessary? If the answer is no, your gap is geographic, not scholarly. Another one is a temporal fallacy. This study was done in 2015. Things have changed. This is only a gap if you can demonstrate that changes are theoretically significant to the phenomenon. Not every passage of time produces a genuine research. Three, novelty claim without evidence. This is the first to study ... Unless you have conducted a systematic review that demonstrates this claim is professionally reckless. If a reviewer finds a prior study, your credibility is destroyed and your work will be rejected even at the time of defense. So that claim that I'm the first to study this is a very, very dangerous claim. Another is the affirmation gap. Most studies have found X, and this study will confirm X in another context. This is not a gap. It is a replication without theoretical justification. Replication is valuable only when the theoretical question is whether findings generalize across contexts, and the theoretical question must be made explicit. The last one is the grievance gap. My community has been ignored by researchers. This may be ethically and politically true, and it matters, but it is not by itself a scholarly gap argument. It must be accompanied by a theoretical claim about why studying this in your community advances the disciplinary knowledge in a specific way. The most expensive gap fallacy is one you do not discover until your final exam. Build your gap argument as if a wholesale examiner is reading every sentence. Because definitely you are going to have an examiner that will read every sentence. If a study existed addressing this gap, will your study still be necessary? If no, your gap is fragile. And let's look at hypothesis development. We try to look at when hypothesis is necessary and when they are not necessary. First, let's clear some confusion. A hypothesis is a specific, testable, directional prediction about the relationship between two or more variables. It is appropriate and in most cases mandatory in quantitative, experimental, and causal research designs. it is inappropriate and in some tradition, not necessary at all in qualitative, interpretative, and exploratory research. So if you are doing a quantitative studies, empirical studies, a hypothesis development is very, very important. But if you are doing an exploratory study, how do you develop hypothesis for something you just want to explore? It is not necessary. If your research question begins with, what is the experience of? How do participants understand? Or what meanings do you are conducting interpretative research? Hypotheses are not only unnecessary, they contradict the premise of your design, which is that meaning emerges from data rather than being predicted in advance. Remember, hypothesis has to do with directional prediction. But if you have to gather data before you get meaning, how do you do prediction before you gather your data? Now, if your research question begins with, does X influences Y? Is there a significant relationship between A and B? Or to what extent does you are conducting causal or correlational research? The hypothesis is not optional. It is the research design, and it is the intellectual backbone for your research design. So what we're trying to say here is that for a lot of qualitative studies, you do not need a hypothesis. But for quantitative studies, you need hypothesis. So for qualitative researchers, what takes the place of hypothesis? A clear theoretical proposition, a statement of the theoretical lens through which you will interpret your data, not a prediction, not a positioning. So for qualitative data or qualitative studies, what takes the place of the hypothesis will be your theoretical proposition. Another thing is a central phenomenon of interest. A precise statement of what you are investigating and why it matters, grounded in the literature. So a hypothesis is not a sign of scholarly rigor. It is a design requirement for a specific class of research questions. Using one when it does not belong is it's as problematic as omitting where it does. Now let's look at the anatomy of a strong hypothesis. We have already agreed that a hypothesis is only required for quantitative studies. For most qualitative studies, you do not need a hypothesis. And we have given what replaces a hypothesis for such studies. Now let's look at the anatomy of a strong hypothesis. And every element of this must be defensible. One, we have independent variable as an element. Your independent variable must be clearly defined as a predictor or cause variable. Then we also have the dependent variable, clearly defined outcome variable that can be measured. The direction, state whether the relationship is positive or negative. or non-directional. Another important element is the population. Specify the group to which the hypothesis applies. This is very important. The hypothesis may not apply to every group. Then the final element is testability. The hypothesis must be falsifiable, capable of being proven wrong by evidence. The hypothesis must be falsifiable, capable of being proven wrong by evidence. That is why we have the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Let's look at the null and hypothesis, alternative hypothesis, and why both of them matter. Every research hypothesis is implicitly paired with a null hypothesis. The statement that there is no relationship or no significant difference. In statistical testing, you are not proving your alternative hypothesis. You are testing whether it is strong enough to reject the null hypothesis. I'll go over that again. In statistical testing, you are not just proving H1, which is your alternative hypothesis. You are testing whether the evidence is strong enough to reject H0, which is the null hypothesis. This distinction matters for scholarly honesty. Your study does not prove the mentorship improves publication output. If we are using mentorship and publication output, for instance, it produces evidence either sufficient or insufficient to reject the null hypothesis that mentorship has no effect. Let's give these two alternative and null hypothesis for us to understand what I'm trying to say. If your hypothesis is institutional research mentorship positively influences publication output among early career academics in Nigerian universities, this is testable. Then the null hypothesis will be that it does not. The null hypothesis will be that it does not. So, you are not only proving that it does, you must prove that you can reject that it does not. And that is the essence of academic and scholarly honesty when you are treating your hypothesis. There's also something called sub-hypothesis. For instance, your main hypothesis will be institutional research mentorship positively influences publication output among early career in Nigerian universities. The sub-hypothesis could be 1, early career academics with assigned research mentors will produce significantly more peer-reviewed publications within 24 months than those without mentors. 2, the frequency of mentor-mentee contact will positively and significantly correlate with publication outputs. 3, female early career academics will report higher perceived benefit from structured mentorship than their male counterparts. Now, you can see from the first hypothesis, we have drawn out 3 sub-hypotheses, and this helps us to answer the hypothesis easily. We talked about scholarly integrity earlier. The hypothesis is not just the combination of your thinking, it is the accountability structure that disciplines your analysis and protects your finding from wishful interpretation. All your findings must be free from wishful interpretation. The research question, hypothesis, and method must form a coherent triangle. A mismatch between any two corners collapses the entire design. So you see, your research question is related to your hypothesis. If you are not using hypothesis, we talk of theoretical proposition. Your research question must be coherent with your theoretical proposition if it is a qualitative research design. If it is a quantitative research design, your research question must be coherent with your hypothesis. And the two of them must inform the kind of design you choose. You cannot have a theoretical position and choose a research method that will look at another theoretical position. That is going to collapse your argument at the end of the day. The mismatch between any two corners collapses the entire design. So it is very, very important that your research question, your hypothesis, and your method are all aligned. So I'm going to give us a little work to do now. And I'll give us some time to finish that work, and we'll report back before we start the next section. Let me see if I can type that into the message box so that we can all pick it from there instead of me just reading out to you. Let me type it. So you can pick it up from the message box. The question is, my research question is that you paste your research question. Is this question causal, correlational, descriptive, exploratory, evaluative, or comparative? Draft a null and alternative hypothesis appropriate to this question and identify the statistical test most appropriate for testing the hypothesis. Then you explain why. Let me see if I can quickly type it. Sorry, did we get the question? Did we get the question?
No. No.
Should I take it again?
Yes, please. Please.
The question is, now, let me take it slowly so that we write it, please, instead of me typing it. My research question is, number one, choose an AI tool you want to use. It could be Claude, it could be ChatGPT, it could be Grok. Choose any AI tool you want to use that you are going to answer this question with. My research question is, then you paste your research question there. Is this question causal, correlational, descriptive, exploratory, evaluative, or comparative? You know, I taught you the different types of research questions. Now you're going to test it out here. Then draft a null and alternative hypothesis. Appropriate to this question and identify the statistical test most appropriate for testing the hypothesis. Then explain why. I'll give us the next 15 minutes to do this. Then we'll come back and we'll give an answers before we move to the next session. I'll give us 15 minutes. The question is in the chat box. You can pick it up from there. So you use any AI tool of your choice, whether Grok, Claude, or ChatGPT, to answer this question. Then we'll come back. Thank you.